Hello. Today in this video, we're going to talk about the question cardiac wall arrangement, cardiac skeleton, chambers of the heart, and draw a section through the ventricles. Okay, so first, this is like a simple section from your ventricles. This is not the actual picture. You need to put more details in your diagram, and we'll talk about this part of the question at the end of this video. And apart from that, this is like the simplest section that you can draw from through your ventricles. And through this we will talk about the cardiac wall arrangement. Now the cardiac wall basically has majorly three layers: the endocardium, the myocardium, and the epicardium. Right? The endocardium is the yellow one, okay? And it's the innermost layer, okay, that lines your um ventricles, you can say, right? And it is made up of endothelium, which is simple squamous epithelium. This is more important in histology point of view, but it's always better to know this for your anatomy questions as well. Now, your next blue part, okay, the thickest part, it's your myocardium. Myocardium that has your cardiac muscle, right? And this thickness is what changes in like the heart. It's important for the electrical activity of the heart, contractility. Everything depends on this particular layer, cardiac muscle. And between the endocardium and the myocardium, between the endocardium and the myocardium, you have your subendocardial layer, which has loose fibrous connective tissue containing the conducting system of the nerves, right? Now, there's a separate video about the conducting system of the nerves. Look through it, but where it is present is your subendocardial layer. Okay. Now, the next layer that we're going to talk about is epicardium. Epicardium is the outermost layer of your heart, okay, and it is made up of mesothelium, which is again connective tissue, right? And you can also say that it's the visceral layer of your pericardium. Visceral layer meaning it's stuck to the organ, right? You also have a parietal pericardium, which is fibrous in nature, which is tough, yeah. And together, like in between these two layers, you have your pericardial cavity. Okay, now there's another, just it's the same thing that we're going to talk about here. I've already said subendocardial layer has your conducting system of the heart. It's important. Your myocardium is where your cardiac muscle is, right? And this one, it has two layers of muscles in the atrium and three layers of muscles in the ventriculum. Now, the next one is here, epicardium. Epicardium is where you find your coronary vessels, your heart vessels, the vessels that supply to the heart itself. They are present in the epicardium. And the subepicardial layer, it has connective tissue. Now, the pericardium, as we already spoke about, it's a double layered sac in the middle inferior mediastinum. It has a serous pericardium, which is the visceral layer of this thing, of pericardium, and then you have a fibrous layer, which is the parietal layer of your pericardium. Or you can also say that it's the inner layer of the parietal pericardium is also serous, and the outer layer of the parietal pericardium has dense CT and it's fibrous. Now, between these two, basically the visceral and the parietal. You might get confused a little here, but we already said how the epicardium itself, made up of mesothelium, is considered a visceral layer of serous pericardium because it's stuck to the organ. So that's why, like over here, I've written it in such a way that it's parietal pericardium. This is taken from Memerix, mainly, like these pictures and stuff. So according to Memerix, this is how it was written. Okay, yeah. So you have a pericardial cavity in between these two layers, right? And there's fluid in between that allows smooth heart movements. It's the same in any cavity that has like two uh, layers of something like pleura or whatever. It's usually filled with fluid. Same for the heart. Now, the second part of this question is your cardiac skeleton. What is your cardiac skeleton? It is basically tough parts of your heart that helps to hold together a lot of parts. Yeah. So it's fibrous tissue again. Now, what are the four main functions of cardiac skeleton? This is the first thing you'll talk about if you get this question. It is it anchors your heart valve cusps to the heart wall. It prevents the black flow by keeping these valves like open whenever the heart pumps blood. There's a change in pressure, or there's so many things that you'll consider here. There's so many chances where your valves and cusps can just close or collapse. But what prevents it from happening is your cardiac skeleton containing fibrous tissue, or it's also called annulus. Okay, then your third main function is point of insertion for your heart muscles, and then you have your fourth main function, which acts as like an electrical insulator, where it prevents like signals to like pass from the atria to the ventricles like suddenly, and like it prevents singular contractions. You again, when you learn the conduction system of the heart, you know that in the SA node is where your electrical activity is like starting, right, from the atria, and then it goes to the ventricle, right? But you don't want a simultaneous contraction here and there where your signals just keep passing through your ventricle. And what prevents it is because of the electrical insulation given by your cardiac skeleton. Okay, this is the diagram you are expected to draw when you explain the parts of a cardiac skeleton. Now, which view are we seeing? We're going to see like a section, a transverse section basically, right? And okay, so first thing, you have your pulmonary valve, okay? Then you have your aortic valve, okay? And both of these have a connection called conus tendon, okay? Now, your pulmonary valve itself has three cusps: anterior, lateral, anterior, left, and right. Okay, and these are the separations, right? Now, you have your aortic valve, which is slightly bigger than your pulmonary valve, and this has a posterior part, a left part, and a right cusp, right? That forms like three openings. Now, the other two valves that we're going to talk about is your bicuspid and tricuspid, right? It's there in the name itself, bicuspid, two cusps, anterior and posterior. Tricuspid, three cusps, which is anterior, posterior, and then you have your septal cusp because it's towards the septum. Now, what is this? This is the membranous part of your septum, heart septum. There's in your heart, there's basically a membranous part, and then you have your muscular part, right? So this part is your membranous septum. Now, two other triangles that you'll find here is your left fibrous triangle, okay, and your right fibrous triangle. The left fibrous triangle is present between your pulmonary valve and your bicuspid valve, and your right fibrous triangle is present between aortic and your tricuspid valve. This is again like a picture uh, that will help you understand better, right? You can see the fibrous triangles, then your annulus fibrosis. Okay, so this is the main thing. We'll get back to this. Scene 1, 2, 3, 4. The major part of your cardiac skeleton is your pulmonary trunk annulus, aortic valve annulus, left fibrous annulus, and your right fibrous annulus. Okay. Now, some extra things over here. We've already spoken about the cusps in your bicuspid and your tricuspid valve. Yeah, these are basically separated by commissures, right? You have three for your tricuspid valve: anteroseptal, posteroseptal, and anteroposterior. And for your bicuspid valve, you have anterolateral and posteromedial. So again, this is just another picture that will help you understand how it looks like, right? And this has your bundle of his shown as well. Trodaros tendon, it's important for one of the topographies in your heart in the right atrium, and we'll talk about it in this question itself. Okay, now chambers of the heart. This is the most basic thing that you can explain, right? We all know what how the blood flows in the heart. We have four chambers. You have your right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle, right? And your right atrium, the openings are your superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, through which deoxygenated blood comes from organs, right? And this passes through your tricuspid valve, right? And it goes to your right ventricle, where it is pumped out of the heart through your pulmonary artery to your lungs for oxygenation. Now, in the lungs, uh, gas exchange takes place, oxygenation happens. So, from the lungs, again, your pulmonary vein brings oxygenated blood from the lungs into your left atrium. Then it goes, it passes the bicuspid valve to enter your left ventricle, and then oxygenated blood is passed or pumped into the body organs to your aorta, right? Now, this is like a very basic overview about the parts in each chamber of your heart, right? For your right atrium, you have your right auricle, okay, and you have your terminal crest. Terminal crest is very important because that's where your SA node is present, okay? And your terminal crest, you have smooth muscles and then you have your pectineus muscles. When you see the pictures, when you see a dissection, in your dissections, basically, when you see the heart, section through the heart, you'll be able to recognize the smooth and pectineus muscles, right? The smooth muscle looks very smooth. Pectineus, it looks very muscly, and it's very easy to actually recognize it on your heart when you go for dissections. Then you have your inferior and superior vena cava opening, right? That is your Todaro's tendon, okay? And then you have an important topography, another one, Cox triangle, where you'll find your AV node. So the two nodes are present in the right atrium itself, right? And you need to know where. So SA node is present in terminal crest, and your AV node is present in the Cox triangle. Now, what is the borders of your Cox triangle? It is your Todaro's tendon, your septal cusp of your tricuspid valve, and then the opening of your coronary sinus. Okay. Now we move to the right ventricle. You have your tricuspid valves, right? Or anterior, posterior, and septal cusps. Then you will find your tendinous cords. Then from there you'll see muscular parts, which is your papillary muscles. And from the papillary muscles, you'll see like small, very thin muscly structures called cornate trabeculae. They're important to like prevent air bubbles in the heart, right? And you have, these are the main structures that you need to know in your right or in your ventricles, right? This is going to be there in both your ventricles. The difference is just the cusp, because you have anterior and posterior, so it's a bicuspid valve. And your left atrium also has also is very similar to the right atrium, but like none of these are present because your SA node and AV node is only present in your right atrium. Sorry. Okay. So again, we already spoke about everything, but this is just like an overview or like in points. Again, this is from Memoryx for you to understand better. Okay, one more structure I forgot. This part. It's called your fossa ovale. It has an importance in embryology where when the baby first cries is when this shuts off. Yeah, when you talk about fetal circulation, there are shunts. So your blood directly goes from your right atrium to your left atrium. So this used to be open, and when this closes is when the baby is out and it has the first cry. Okay, so again, right auricle, pectineus muscle, interatrial septum. The word says it, right? This part is your interatrial septum. You have your fossa ovale, which is a remnant of your septum primum and secundum after birth, closing fetal interatrial shunt. There are shunts that you need to know for your fetal circulation, which is the most important, right? Then you have your AV septum. This is your AV septum. Then you have crista terminalis. We already spoke about it. It's where your SA node is present. Then you have intervenous tubercle. It's like a ridge. It's just like a bulge or like a ridge between your superior vena cava and your inferior vena cava. Now, openings in the right atrium. Sinus vena cava, right, which is your opening for the two veins that supplies blood into your right atrium, which is your superior vena cava and your inferior vena cava. And veins have valves wired to prevent the backflow, right? Then you also have the opening of the coronary sinus, right, which also has a valve. Now, coronary sinus is where your coronary arteries are like present and it supplies to your heart, right? Then you have opening for your small cardiac veins and your right AV orifice, right? Now, apart from that, it's the valves, the tricuspid valves, the triangle of Koch. It's important. The borders are important. Right? Okay, so this is um another like picture that's gonna help you remember better. You can see this part. You'll see like the smooth part of your right atrium, like crista terminalis here, and like the muscular part here, or which is basically your pectinate muscles. You can see papillary muscles, right? This like this thick parts are your papillary muscles, and like at the end, all these are your corner trabeculae. These are tendinous cords. They look whitish, so it's easy to for you to like um, differentiate between the muscles and the tendinous cords as well. And your cusps, you can see posterior, then septal, and your anterior. Okay, now your right ventricle. Again, it's uh yeah, it has cusps, papillary muscles, trabeculae coronae, right? And then you have all these structures. We have already spoken about it. Interventricular septum is the septum that I was talking about in the picture in the cardiac skeleton. There's a muscular part and a membranous part. Then you have your left atrium, basic structures. Again, very similar to the right atrium, except a few parts because there's no SA node and AV node in your left atrium. Openings, pulmonary vein. Your pulmonary vein basically has uh, like it has four, like if you talk about a section, you'll see four parts. It depends on like where you're cutting, right? But usually in dissections, like when you see, you'll be able to see like four thin openings. That will be your indication for your left atrium. And when there are two openings like from the back, that will be your right atrium because that's your superior and inferior vena cava. Again, there's a picture here. You could just look at it. You can see again for fossa oval. It's basically it becomes fossa oval after birth, but in your fetal circulation, it's called foramen oval because That's where there's no closure, there's an opening, so it moves. I mean, it helps the blood move from your right atrium to your left atrium. Again, left ventricle, same things. Bicuspid valve, papillary muscles, anterior and posterior. Again, these papillary muscles are basically attached to your cusp. So, there's anterior and posterior in your left ventricle, and there's anterior posterior septal in your right ventricle. And again, septum. That's it for the chambers of the heart. Now we'll talk about the cross section you're supposed to draw uh, of the ventricles. Now, you can see it's very similar. You talk about the layers, left ventricle, right ventricle, right, and endocardium, myocardium, and then you have epicardium. Now, it what you talk about here is the supply to the muscles. You have your posterior one third part supplied by a right coronary artery, and your anterior two-third of your myocardium, sorry, not the heart itself, but the myocardium, supplied by your left coronary artery. And there's an acute angle, obtuse angle, and the branches here that you can see is your anterior interventricular branch and great cardiac vein, posterior interventricular branch, and middle cardiac vein. So this is all for this particular question. The diagrams are very important, and if you can explain cardiac flow structures simply, it's going to be okay.